All right, welcome to the latest episode of the Miami Matters podcast. You got your two South Beach Sports co-creators here with you today. We got Luke, and I'm Nick, and we're talking all things Victor Oladipo today. As you know, the news came in yesterday that Heat fans had been dreading. Victor Oladipo has decided to undergo season-ending surgery on his right quadriceps tendon. He's having that surgery today in New York, and there is no timetable for his return. So Oladipo is a guy who played very few games for the Heat this season. He was a trade deadline acquisition, and so I want to start there. The Heat made that trade a few months ago to help them compete in the Eastern Conference. They traded away Kelly Olynyk and Avery Bradley in exchange for Oladipo, a former All-Star who we knew to be injury-prone and proved to be injury-prone once again. So obviously there was risk there in trading for a guy like Oladipo. The Heat knew that. We knew that. They did it anyway. But now that the injury has cost him the season, he's cost them, helping them in the playoffs, I wanted to ask you, Luke, what are your thoughts on that trade now that he's hurt and that the Heat, they're not going to get Oladipo in the playoffs, but they're not getting Kelly Olynyk or Avery Bradley, who might be hurt, who might not be great sometimes, but still would have been at least semi-meaningful contributors.
Yeah, I mean, I still think the trade's a win, no matter what, because even with Kelly Olynyk leaving the Heat, that led to Trevor Ariza becoming the starting power forward. And I'm not sure about you guys, but I much rather prefer the play of Trevor Ariza rather than Kelly Olynyk. So not only did the Kelly Olynyk trade provide playing time with Trevor Ariza, but also with the subtraction of Avery Bradley that allowed Kendrick Nunn to step into that starting role and just gave him more playing time to prove that he's actually a very ample starter, I think, in the NBA. You know, what about you?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, it was a risk. The Heat knew it was a risk, and they took the risk, and now we have to deal with the downside of the risk.
The repercussions.
Hindsight is 20/20, but at the end of the day, the Heat still fleeced the Rockets.
Yeah.
I still think we fleeced them. Because you look at what Kelly Olynyk was doing, there just something wasn't there. Kelly Olynyk, he's putting up numbers, but just look at how Dwayne Dedmon is working with this Heat team, how much more comfortable Jimmy looks, like the passes he's able to throw him, he catches them, he puts them in, and we're getting so much more value out of him as a backup five, and then the guard play has picked up as well, so I think it's a risk. It sucks. Obviously, you tell me, okay, would you like to add Olynyk and Bradley to this team? Well, yes, they'll help somehow, but it's a risk, and we'll go into this in a little bit. We'll go into this now. But I still think Oladipo is going to make some contributions to the Heat. So that's where I want to go next. Will Victor Oladipo ever wear a Miami Heat jersey again? That's the question that so many people are asking because he has no contract guaranteed. But so, Luke, what do you think? You think he wears a Heat jersey again?
I want to say yes. Because a lot of that is relying on his bird rights, which means that the Heat can go over the cap limit to re-sign Victor Oladipo. They have those same bird rights with Duncan Robinson. So yes, I think for the right contract amount, I think Victor Oladipo could end up being a member of the Heat next year. I mean, there were talks before this season and in the offseason about Oladipo possibly receiving a max contract. That's completely off the table right now. I mean, I think when we're looking at what amount of money Victor Oladipo would receive, we're looking at something in that $10 to $15 million range, maybe a 1-year, $20 million prove-it deal. But I don't think the Heat would have to just unload their salary for a guy like Oladipo right now, who has shown that he's pretty injury-prone over the last couple seasons. What do you think about this?
No, yeah, I think the $20 million deal is completely off the table. Like that might have even been a little much for Dragic in hindsight, but he earned it because he helped us get to the finals and Heat lifer, and he's going to get his jersey retired and whatnot. But I think for Oladipo, from Oladipo's perspective, he once again enters a season having to prove himself. That's what he was supposed to be doing with the Heat this season before he got hurt. He was going to prove himself in the playoffs, and the Heat were going to pay him, or somebody else was going to pay him something. Maybe, Oladipo puts up a good run with the Heat. Maybe the Heat do give him $20 million. I think he's just going to have to take a one deal somewhere. He's going to have to take a 1-year deal on a contender somewhere to prove himself worthy of $20 million a year once again. And so I don't see why he wouldn't do it on the Heat, why he wouldn't want to do it on the Heat. He he's wanted to be in Miami for so long. He finally got to Miami, and he's there. I don't see why from his side he wouldn't want to take the money that the Heat give him to prove himself. Maybe he can prove himself long-term with the Heat or prove himself elsewhere. But I think from his perspective, from his point of view, from his side, I don't see why he wouldn't want to wear a Miami Heat jersey next year. What I do want to talk about, though, is Greg Sylvander from 5 Reasons Sports made this point on Twitter that the way he sees that the Heat don't re-sign Oladipo is if they try to go after a big free agent like Kawhi Leonard or somebody in the offseason. Then there I do see the possibility that he doesn't wear a Heat jersey again because the Heat just decide not to pay him. They pay their restricted free agents in Robinson and Nunn, and they let Oladipo walk and go for a big fish. But I think from Oladipo's side, there's no reason for him not to want to be back, because that's the next thing I want to talk about. I said we were going to go into the phrasing. Of what does it mean that Oladipo has decided. That's how the Heat specifically released that statement. He has decided. So that implies that there was a possibility that Victor Oladipo could have returned this season, but ultimately he decided not to, and I don't think you can blame him. You don't have a guaranteed contract. You're not on a franchise that is like, listen, you've been here for a while, we're going to pay you, kind of like Dragic did in the finals.
Yeah, no, I mean, just to piggyback on that, I think the Heat and Oladipo have a very healthy and good relationship. I think it was mutual that the Heat could look to re-sign Oladipo in the offseason, but they want to re-sign a fully healthy player. I mean, if you give Oladipo a full offseason to undergo surgery and rehab and really just strengthen that injury, then that could be big for the Heat. I think just to piggyback on a previous point you made about possibly letting Oladipo walk and then going after a big fish such as Kawhi Leonard, the Heat have to be very careful with that. Because, I mean, if you remember in the 2020 offseason, they pretty much punted on the entire offseason in the hopes of possibly signing a guy like Giannis. And that backfired tremendously. I mean, that 2020 offseason, I believe, was one of the decision to punt on the 2020 offseason, I believe, was one of Pat Riley's worst decisions as president. And obviously the Heat have recomposed themselves since then with the additions of Dedmon and Ariza and Oladipo. But I don't think the Heat necessarily have to just wait out for a guy like Kawhi Leonard when they have enough cap space to re-sign Oladipo and to just re-sign other contributors like Robinson and Nunn, also acquire some lesser mid-level exception type players. So the Heat have to be very careful when it comes to waiting out for a big fish type player. The point that I want to make with the phrasing that Victor Oladipo has decided is that a lot of people kind of speculated that might indicate some sort of bad blood in the relationship between the Heat and Victor Oladipo's camp, sort of like there might have been between Kawhi Leonard and the Spurs, or sort of with like Justice Winslow and the Heat, all that lack of clarity that there was with his injury. I don't really think that's there. I think the Heat, at the end of the day, they would have loved for Victor Oladipo to be like, nah, listen, I can play. I'm going to push through. Let's go do something in the playoffs. But I think at the end of the day, they understand his decision, they respect his decision, and they support his decision. And so I don't think that there's anything wrong with the Heat's relationship with Victor Oladipo. And I do think that as long as the money works out, I would say that we will see him in a Miami Heat jersey next season. So before we get into the next one, what's your prediction as far as contract numbers in Oladipo? Contract, I mean, I say you give him $15 million. That'd be my prediction. 1 year, $15 million. I could see a scenario where they give him a 2-year team option type deal if they want to go. If they really trust Oladipo and they want to pay him, we could see something similar to like a 2-year, $40 million deal at most with like a team option on that second year. I don't think either way the Heat will overpay him significantly, but we'll see. I'm very curious to see how this Oladipo story will play out come off season. So yeah. Yeah, 1 year team option maybe. Yeah, I definitely see that, but I don't think Oladipo would want to be in a team option for his second year if he has a very good first year. That's true. And then the Heat can have him back cheap. That's not a position he's going to want to be in. All right, so now I want to get into what Oladipo's injury does to the Heat's postseason chances. So, Luke, what do you think that
the Heat's postseason ceiling is now that they don't have Victor Oladipo as the third All-Star?
I mean, it's lower. And you'll probably disagree with me on this, I really didn't think the Heat were serious title contenders anyway this season, with or without Oladipo. I mean, obviously Oladipo gives you a better shot, just because he's someone who can attack the basket, someone he's another third elite defender, or fourth, I should say, or I would put Ariza in that category. But at the same
Relax. The reason is not. There's tiers here. There's the first tier, which is Jimmy and Bam.
Yeah.
Then there's the second tier, which is Oladipo. And he could be a first tier guy, but he hasn't really been healthy. But there's like a second tier just below that. And then there's Ariza, who's like a very good defender. But
we'll put Oladipo, Ariza, and Iggy in that very good
I
category.
would make it a separate category, but yeah.
Gotcha.
Let's not say the Heat have a bunch of guys who can play defense as well as Jimmy and Bam can.
Anyways, no, but no, I mean, I think Oladipo would have definitely raised your ceiling. I mean, I think he would have made that possible Brooklyn Nets series a little more interesting, especially since he can guard players like Kyrie and James Harden. But, I mean, now I still think that he will be a fun team to watch in the playoffs. I think they'll be able to get out the first round, no matter if they play the Knicks or the Hawks. Or not really sure about the Bucks series, especially with their addition of Jrue Holiday. But I still think the Heat are a second-round exit type team. I think that they could make any series with either the Sixers, the Nets, or the Bucks interesting. But when watching those teams throughout the season, I don't think the Heat are in that tier. What do you think?
What the Victor Oladipo injury does is that it robs us of what, to me, would have been a really interesting potential playoff matchup in Heat versus Nets. Because you look at the Nets' big three of Kyrie, James Harden, and Kevin Durant, and then you look at the Heat's defensive big three, if you will, and the Heat have a guy that's about as good as anybody in the league that you can put on each of those three. You have Bam, who few guys are as versatile defenders. Like, I'm not sure who else you'd want to put on KD that isn't Bam Adebayo.
Oh, for sure.
Then you have Jimmy Butler, who you put on James Harden, and then you have Oladipo, who you put on Kyrie Irving. And so now you have the Brooklyn Nets offensive powerhouse, no defense, versus the Heat's three lockdown defenders defending these stars. And it would have just been very interesting to see if the Nets just score more points and everybody doesn't matter, or if the Heat limit the Nets enough to outscore them. I think that would have been a very interesting series, and it would have showed us so much about the Nets. It would have showed us so much about what really is like a winning formula to win multiple playoff series and to get to the 16 wins that you need to win the NBA Finals, because it would have revealed yeah, this offense-only super team with additions of Blake Griffin is not going to work, or it would have been like, yeah, you can just score more points than everybody else, and it doesn't really matter how good you are at defense. So I mean, that not really going into the Heat's chances there, but I think it would have just been a very interesting playoff series, and it still will be, but it would have just been, now it'll be 3-on-2 and not that 3-on-3 matchup. It would have been like, who comes out on top, offense or defense.
And you also have to factor in how Ariza often guards other teams' point guards. He guarded Damian Lillard in the two matchups. He guarded Steph early in the season. So I think we definitely could have seen Trevor Ariza lock up. No, I wouldn't say lock up. We would have seen Trevor Ariza attempt to slow down Kyrie. And one question I have for you, I just thought about this. I think we all have the Nets as the consensus favorite in the East at the moment. Which series would scare you more? A series versus the Sixers, or a series versus the Bucks?
Oh, for me, for sure it would be the Bucks, because you have to factor in, well, first of all, these guys, you'd assume Coach Budenholzer has learned something, and that he's going to be better. And so they're going to, but I think just for me with the Bucks, it's just Jrue Holiday and the impact that he's had for them defensively, and he's just really elevated that team. And so I'm worried about what Jrue Holiday could do to Tyler Hero, Kendrick Nunn, and Goran Dragic.
Oh, no.
I'm worried about Chris Middleton, because Chris Middleton, we got guys who can guard him, but he's still, if you look back on that playoff series, there was a few games where Chris Middleton went and he got his.
He won game 4 by himself pretty much. Yeah.
And so that series is just, that's a tough matchup, and it would be a very tough 3-6 matchup, but I'm of the belief that the Bucks are going to let the Heat win today because as much as we might not want to see them, they don't want to see us either.
Do we play the Bucks or Sixers today?
We play the Sixers today. Sorry,
Gotcha.
but when we play the Bucks
on
Saturday at 8, I think the Bucks probably rest a guy or two, let the Heat win, push the Heat into the 4-5 series, and make sure that they get to play the Knicks or the Hawks or somebody much more favorable than the team that just completely dismantled them last year. Because as much as they're improved, the Heat are still the Heat, and it's not like Giannis has completely revolutionized his game, and like what worked for the Heat last season will still work this season, even if the Bucks are better, and that's just not a first-round matchup that the Bucks want to see.
And I think it's kind of crazy how like a lot of the Heat's fan base is more scared of what Jrue Holiday can do to the Heat rather than Giannis.
Yeah, for sure. Because the Heat have proven they can stop Giannis. They can build that wall. They can force him into taking tough shots. They can get him at the free throw line, and he can just start missing free throws again, airballing free throws.
I have to disagree with you though on your answer. The Sixers actually scare me a little more than the Bucks right now, just because if there's one area of Bam Adebayo's defensive game where it's not elite per se, it's rim protecting. I mean, we've seen his weakness be how he plays defense against interior post players. We saw he struggled with Jonas Valanciunas in the past. He has some struggle with Nikola Vucevic, Nikola Jokic. So I would be very curious to see that Bam Joel Embiid matchup. Kind of scares me a little bit, I'm not gonna lie. And also the Heat have shown that they struggle against corner shooters, and the Sixers have some of the best corner 3-point shooters in the league in Seth Curry and Danny Green. So that's why I would be more opposed to a Sixers series rather than a Bucks series.
I think Embiid would. I agree with you there that the Heat would be hard pressed to find answers for Joel Embiid, but at the same time, Embiid himself has struggled a bit against Bam, and I'm not here to say that Bam's gonna outscore Embiid or something, but I just feel like when you look at the Bucks, you look at three guys you look at the three guys of Holiday, Giannis, and Middleton. That's just quite the trio in my opinion, because when you look at I just don't really trust Ben Simmons that much. I feel like in a playoff series, if it's Simmons and it's Embiid's going to have to go and get 35 every game, in my opinion. If you want to beat the Heat, if you're the Sixers, Embiid has to go get you 35 points. And Simmons just isn't reliable enough on offense for me to be like, okay, yeah, I think that they have enough to really scare me, because Embiid scares me. But Ben Simmons doesn't scare me. And then once you go from there, are we looking at Seth Curry, and who scares me more, Jrue Holiday or Seth Curry? Well,
no, obviously.
Jrue Holiday scares me a lot more. So
I mean, I agree with you there on Ben. I mean, Ben's scoring does not scare me at all come playoff time. He hasn't shown yet in the playoffs that he can be that guy. Obviously, he was hurt last year in the playoffs, but before that, he struggled offensively. So I'll be curious to see, especially how Ben Simmons will fare in the playoffs. I think I'm going to wrap it up today, guys. Just going to get a short podcast in, kind of recapping the Victor Oladipo injury and what it means for the future of the Heat. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and like and subscribe. That would mean so much to this growing channel. If you're on another one of our various podcast platforms, go check out some future podcasts. We'll be posting more often for you guys. And yeah, we'll catch you later. Peace.